About 10 years ago, Peter Fonagy asked for us to make a website which allowed us to record the PHQ-9, and then over a number of years that developed into recording many measures, and now obviously we're here trying to record MHSDS measures.
In terms of POD now, POD is now seen as an online clinical tool used by clinicians, so it's just a tool where clinicians can log in online, use outcome measures, and then the results of those outcome measures, they can use it to kind of inform their clinical diagnosis or their clinical judgment. So that's how we've kind of made POD clinically relevant to the clinicians and the clinicians using within the services.
And then in terms of Norfolk, so originally they were to be a trial site for us to try and find a way to match our data with the MHSDS submission.
In terms of where we started from, I suppose our routine collection of outcome measures in a clinically meaningful way, this kind of project started probably 3 or 4 years ago now, where we recognised the importance of trying to integrate outcome measures into the day-to-day clinical practice that we were offering, and also ensuring that children and young people were using, or will be using outcome measures with children and young people as part of their kind of treatment planning. And this is something that over the years and historically has been very sporadic. So certain clinicians, maybe dependent on their training, would complete outcome measures quite routinely, sessionally, and use that to review progress. What we started to realise though is that this wasn't standardised or a systematic process at all across our children and people's mental health service line. And a group of us who were enthusiastic about routine outcome measures and influenced by yourselves really got together to think about how can we make that a more systematic process that was going to be meaningful to the young people and families that we were seeing, meaningful to the clinicians, but also adhered to the requirements in terms of KPIs, NHS England requirements, etc.
We receive quite a lot of information, and at times quite a lot of which doesn't really tell us a great deal about what's really going on in our services, which is the interaction with children and families and the difference that is making. And so for a very long time now we've been having conversations about, well, why can't we be collecting, collating and reporting outcome and sort of client satisfaction type measures as part of the set of data that we routinely receive and look at, and opens up conversations. It kind of begs the right sorts of questions that we need to explore in some more detail, and the quality of service provision and what people like us as commissioners need to be thinking about commissioning as further developments. And there was an element of getting quite cross and crusty. Come on, guys. We had it in the contract, and we're getting those traditional contracty type conversations, which are quite often not very helpful. But the great thing is that the service itself has, in more recent times, as Tim's described, picked it up, run with it, and wanted to do it, and found the way of making it begin to work, which is great to see.
We saw the CWPs how useful it was using them within their supervision sessions. That's how I came to see the POD. And I think that's when I sort of kind of thinking that was the right thing to go down, and how to implement it into the wider team.
And in terms of the teams that we were thinking of, I suppose that there's been a mantra, hasn't there, of starting off slowly and gradually, if you like, and then with a plan to expand to further teams. So in terms of the teams that we chose for our pilot year, they were our core services really, so our child and family team and our youth mental health team, and a specialist sub-team that kind of is integrated within those core services anyway.
And I guess some of the rationale for that was we were picking the teams that were starting from the lowest baseline.
Yeah.
So all our specialist teams had measures already mandated that they were collecting, but the core services were pretty much doing nothing systematically.
Yeah. And actually, the mantra that we've had all the way through is that this isn't about satisfying commissioner requirements. This isn't about data requirements really, even though they're that's a bonus. This is about how can we offer the best practice to children and people, and we know that just by using outcomes in a clinically meaningful way, which POD facilitates us to do, we know that our outcomes hopefully will be even better. So I guess that's what also drove us towards thinking about POD.
I think there was a challenge around sort of going up to 25 was a bit of a challenge around the sort of the measures that we use as well, which is, I think, something that we had to overcome.
Yeah, and I suppose it's fair to say, and we forget about these things, but we used the specific implementation theory and model to think about if we were going to try and do this as successfully as we want it to be, then we need to ensure that all of those kind of implementation facilitators are in place. So we put a business case forward for assistant psychologists to be able to be situated within our localities to really support the implementation of ROMs, training of ROMs, the facilitation of POD. We liaised with our business change specialists and our informatics teams and our ICT department around getting approvals for having another system come into the trust.
I think it was crucial for us to sort of kind of set up a steering group with the champions, and the champions are clinicians who are actually embedded in the teams. I think that was really important because we were coming in from an external and central, mostly central, so we thought about with the culture and changes that we needed the clinicians within the teams. So the champions had one in each team to provide that support for the teams, and the APs were going in to do the training with those champions, supported by those champions. So I think that was quite successful, I think, in terms of, we did have some difficulties because of the localities and changes and things like that, but I think that was a good
Help
decision.
us change the culture and think about the clinical use of outcomes. And I suppose once we had all of that into place, there was also the importance of working with the POD team centrally, and we knew that there was going to be adaptations required for our specific teams, measures that perhaps didn't already exist, such as the Core 34, onto the database, thinking about licensing and requirements, and all of those kind of things we had to kind of think of. So an awful lot when you think about it, but it's felt very much like a joint venture with us and the assistant psychologists and the wider kind of champions, informatics particularly, but also the POD team themselves as well, linking with them.
And I think that sort of communication and that open access through emails and things like that was really helpful, I think, to have that access to the POD team, going along and sort of sharing some of the sort of feedback from the early stages. I think it's quite crucial. I was just thinking about sort of kind of within the the leadership from the implementation theories, that we did have quite a strong leadership at the beginning, throughout really, to make sure to keep on track, because I think that was quite necessary in a meeting.
I think having the graphs available in the sessions. So I do have graph paper in my office and have previously graphed my own outcome measures, but it took up quite a big chunk of a session to do that. So having those graphs to be able to monitor progress and actually really have the conversation about what are we doing and why are we doing it, and is it doing what we want it to do, has been really helpful.
I think it's been helpful sort of kind of being able to, if you're stuck with what and actually tracking and it's not moved, that's a good conversation.
As in the client's progress.
And seeing whether what we're doing is the right way, or do we need to change something, change tack. Also around discharges as well. So I think in terms of people sort of kind of moving to episodes of care within our service, I think with going for goal-based measures and actually achieving that person's goal, that's been helping us with sort of discharging as well, and have that conversation.
And I've been using it in initial assessments, which is something people were concerned about. So working with quite complex young people, having them come along and it's their first face-to-face contact they have with the service. And the first thing I do, apart from discuss data protection, is straight into completing an outcome measure with them, and actually the response has been really positive. People have found it really helpful to then, I can feedback immediately because it's scored for me. This is what this is saying, does that fit for you? What does that tell us about where we need to focus in the session? And it has felt like actually it's made those assessments more efficient.
I guess for me, both being there from the start of the pilot and kind of handling most of the data side of things, the difference it's made in terms of the level of information we can get now has been really vast and really visible. we've kind of had previous reports that look at our outcome measures data, and it's been, say, maybe a couple of hundred outcome measures across the service, and now we've got 6,000 in the course of the year, and we can get 500 each month, and it's just exponential from there.
It's so important for teams, I think, as well, when when you break it down per team, so teams can actually see how much data they're evidencing and kind of how young people are doing in their services. I think there's something that's really useful and really it motivates people.
Yeah, I mean, I was just looking at data for the teams, and like the early help pathway has collected outcome measures with 95% of their service users, and you can see those service users improving all of their measures. I was looking at trauma groups data earlier, and again, you could see whether the trauma group service users are improving, and I guess some of it was quite interesting, like there was a real decrease going up to their 5th session out of 6, and then the 6th session their symptoms increased. And I guess wondering, and that was across the board, maybe there's anxieties about being discharged, maybe there's anxieties about the group ending.
So I guess there's always those narratives around data as well. Like it's not just looking at what the kind of data itself shows. There's something happening behind it. I guess you could say that about kind of KPIs and stuff as well. We know why some of the targets haven't been met.
Yeah, I agree. For me, that's always why I advocate being used clinically, because then they can have those conversations with the service users about the nuance of the data and about whether that's correct, and about, is that last score increasing because they are anxious about discharge? Is it something that we can support them with, or is it just kind of...
I think it's made it so much more meaningful and collaborative, because before, how the ROMs would be doing it was often just on paper, then it would be given to an assistant psychologist, it would be scored up and put somewhere, and actually these young people did these questionnaires and never knew what happened to them, and it didn't inform their care. So I think now being able to look at it with their therapist and being able to have those meaningful conversations is really important, and PODs allowed us to do that. So
I think it's been nice to see a lot of outcome measures used across all clinicians as well, because there'll be obviously types of clinicians who are more used to using outcome measures. For example, occupational therapists or CBT therapists might have more of a background in that, but then this is extended it across everyone, including maybe people who don't come from a kind of more psychologically minded background, and it means that there's kind of a consistency around all of the measures that we're using.
And I spoke to a creative therapist who said she found that especially in art therapy sometimes it can be really hard to know when an ending is kind of the right time. So she said using the goal-based outcomes have been able to really focus the therapy, and kind of following on from that, she said that she thinks it will really help waiting lists and just more effective short-term treatments.
Yeah.
No, I think that stuff is so important, really kind of driving home when we're kind of done with the work that we're going to do, and kind of driving the idea of kind of having care come in episodes that finish.
And it fits really nicely within the recovery model as well, of thinking about what it is that they kind of need to be discharged and what that recovery means to them. And I find it hard to argue with the idea of using a goal.
There's the method that Norfolk's using, which is POD. Currently, you download essentially an Excel file from POD, and then that Excel file by the informatics team at Norfolk is uploaded into their data warehouse, and their informatic person just runs code, and that code mashes it together, and the informatics person has the details of that, which could be shared with other services. So that would be sort of high-level NHS way, where essentially no normal user would ever need to know about it, and it's all sort of done by the databases with one informatics person.
First had sort of conversations with some of the CYP leads at the Trust, looking at outcome measures and specifically POD probably about 18 months ago, and POD was one of the tools that came to the fore as something that the services wanted to use and wanted to develop, and was something they were comfortable with using, and it wasn't something smooth sailing, so to speak. But what has been good is the fact that there's been clinical buy-in for the outcome measure, and certainly that's where we've had challenges in the past, is that we haven't necessarily had that, and it's been very much things that have been put upon us.
Yeah, it was definitely the priority was to make it clinically useful and to kind of get the clinician buy-in. But then, particularly as that's kind of grown and grown and grown, there's been vast amounts of data and information that can be used from that, which is particularly where yourselves and MHSDS come in.
Yeah, having identified that POD was going to be the tool to be used, that was then sort of set in train a number of actions. So obviously we then had quite a lot of input from the Anna Freud Centre and the technical team there to see what the output was. So what could be output from POD that we could then link into with our data set. And the end goal here was how could we tie together all of this data that clinicians really liked and were capturing quite a volume of. How could we bring that into the Mental Health Services Dataset, and how can we do that by April 2020? So really that's been our challenge, and I've been working with our technical team here, looking at that data. So we had to identify which parts of the MHSDS tables we wanted that data to flow into, and then a colleague in the team did then quite a lot of work taking that output, flowing that data into those tables, discussing with yourself, David, around the output of that, and really trying to identify why there may be some data quality issues, or why that data may not be flowing as we'd want it to. So were we getting all of the data coming through? And I think to begin with it was around sort of like 10, 15, 20%. I think in the most recent update it's now up to about 85%. So that's 85% of the data that's coming through we're able to match. So we're quite happy with that, well, really happy with that, because that proves that we can then start flowing that data into the MHSDS and show that we're able to capture and report CYP outcomes for the organisation. So I think it's a really positive from our point of view.
Yeah, and I think as myself, it's more the link to the clinicians. It's then really positive from that point of view as well, because you can start to liaise with clinicians and managers and teams and kind of talk about our ability now to evidence the impact of our services and evidence the impact that we are helping service users, and hopefully using that to kind of support commissioning and service development in the future as well.
To be able to see some of the difference that is being made to children and young people can help make cases for further investment. Decision makers can seem very distant and not like they're real human beings, but when they can actually see some of the difference that's being made, and when they have the difficult decisions to make about, do I give £1 million over here or £1 million over there, this is the sort of data that can actually make a difference, because we are actually relating to human beings here, and if people can have an understanding of the sorts of return on an investment they might actually get at a human level, as well as volumes of this or numbers of those, then it can make a difference to the longer term investment in our services. And it also just plays on a quality level. It just gives you those kind of focal points to zoom in on with practitioners, clinicians, and our kind of quality teams. Areas that need a bit of further analysis, a bit of further help, or things that we need to be doing differently as commissioners.
The method for people who don't have access to a data warehouse or an informatics person. So on the POD website, again, there would just be a button which you would click download, and your MHSDA data would come out again into an Excel file. You would have your local patient database, whatever that may be, and you would download some essentially schedule data, like patient data with the dates that you met the patients from that database. And then another page on POD, you would you say, here's the file, here's my POD file, here's my patient records file, blend. And that would be it. So if you imagine sort of uploading a photograph to Facebook, you're basically just uploading 2 files to a pod page, blended, and spat back out again as an MHSDS file. In other words, it doesn't require any coding, it doesn't require any knowledge of computing as such, it would just be a single web page.
So if you're interested in using POD, all you have to do is just email us, pod@anafreud.org. The email will be at the end of the video. And all the information we really need is just the number of users that will be using POD initially, and also what measures you want. We do have a list of measures already on POD. However, if there's other measures that you want uploaded onto POD, we can do that by request.